Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Rachel and Itai with me. We're going to talk
Hey everyone.
about PM careers in the age of AI transformation. Um, we'll start with a quick intro. I'll start with an introduction about myself. I'm Rachel. I am the founder of PMadvising.com. Essentially, I am an executive and career coach and a former Meta and Amazon product manager, also a startup advisor and angel investor. Itao, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks Rachel, and hey everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join. My name is Itai. I'm currently PM at Jane Street, which is a quantitative trading firm based in New York. Spent the last 15 years or so at Meta, Google, Apple as a PM, and specifically the last couple of years I've been working on various AI transformation initiatives. So very much excited to chat about how the industry is changing.
Yeah, and a little personal note, Itai was actually on my interview panel at Meta, so I owe a lot of my career to Itai.
The olden days.
Yep. Okay, so before we start, if you can drop into your chat your name, where you're joining from, and one skill you wish you had that has nothing to do with tech, just as a quick icebreaker. Anybody wants to drop in chat? Awesome. We have folks from uh, Portland, Chicago. I think I saw someone from Bangalore. Munjanat, what about something that isn't related to product? I see somebody who would wish they wanted to know how to fly, play the
A lot of
guitar,
flying today. A lot of
a lot
flying.
of flying, musically talented. Edinburgh, Scotland. Hey, Ellie, play the piano like you did as a teenager. It's never too late to go back. Awesome. Wish I could sing. I actually trained as an opera singer when I was in my teens. Um, Nothing much stuck from it. Hey, Ryan, play music and sing. Lots of people want to sing. Feel like America's Got Talent or The Voice are about to make a comeback here. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to continue. And the agenda that we're going to set for today, we're going to talk a bit about the industry context, the evolution of the PM role, what this means for promotions, and what it means for interviews. And I want to start with the context of the industry, and I'm looking at it from a B2C lens and a B2B lens. And there was an 84% surge in new app submissions to the App Store in Q1 2026. I can share from my own personal experience, a friend of mine who has zero knowledge in coding, a sound engineer, built some sort of an app to keep track of plugin updates. He sells that app for $20 a pop. I'm not sure he has a college degree, but that person never coded in his life before, right? And so what this means is that building apps got cheaper on the B2C context. And the question used to be, can we build it? But the new question is actually, should we build this? And when you're thinking about the context of SaaS valuations, we're actually seeing that SaaS valuations were at the peak during COVID for zero interest rates, right, in the B2B context. And 2023, they fell from the peak and below historical averages as well. And towards 2026, you're seeing a slight recovery, but the compression is interesting because if you're looking under the hood of the different SaaS companies, software as a service, you're seeing that AI native SaaS like Palantir, ServiceNow, Snowflake, Datadog are trading at 15 to 40x multiplies. High growth SaaS are that have strong net retention revenue are trading at 8 to 12x, and legacy and low and slow growth SaaS are evaluated at 3 to 5x relative to earnings. And so the valuations, and this is makes sense because people can make their own custom tools now. And so it means that there's a lot more competition that that is going on, and that's true for B2C and that's true for B2B. And if it's true for the business context, then it's also true for the career. When you're thinking about building being cheaper, for the businesses, it means that anybody can ship a V0 or a V1, and your moat is in your judgment and in the trust that you're building with your customers and being able to solve problems for them that they can't solve themselves. And really important not to break their trust. This is extremely important in the context of agentic AI when you're letting machines take over, right? For the career, it means that any candidate can claim that they are AI fluent or AI native, but you need to show that you can apply your critical thinking, ask the right questions. The valuations are lower because building is cheaper, which means that the average product is worth less and you're competing more for attention. This is true both for B2B and for B2C. VCs are funding and are asking harder questions around retention and around your ARR and your design partners. And for the career, this means that the value of a product manager is compressing. We've seen historically industry is falling out of love with middle managers. And the question is also what happens with product managers. And the bar for what gets you hired or promoted is now higher and is also looking at different skills. And we'll talk about that. Differentiation is also harder. You can't really just outchip. You win on, you win on insight, and then you can't outproduce a candidate with better prompts. You win on your judgment, right? And so the PM who earns a premium in this market is the one that compounds judgment over time, knows the appropriate use of AI, knows to use it beyond just prompt engineering and beyond just synthesizing research. Itai, I'll push this to you. We had a really interesting discussion on the direction of PM to engineering ratio.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. Yeah, the next few slides are kind of focusing on how AI is shaping up the workforce and organizational structure. On the left, we see the traditional model where every PM used to work with between like 6, 7 to 10 engineers. And then on the right, we see two completely opposite directions that the industry is taking. The first one is what we call the velocity model, where decision quality is quite meaningful, with engineers essentially able to accomplish much more with AI. There is an hypothesis that much more PM capacity is needed to support them to make sure that all of that work is being directed into the right direction and the right business strategy. So there's much more sort of like close tie between every engineer individual and a product manager. On the right side, again, we see a very different approach where essentially engineers are taking more autonomy, therefore, and are able to also perform other functions beyond engineering, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. In that scenario, there's much less need for, hypothetically, for a PM to be really close to every single feature that's being shipped. And then as a result, there's a single PM over many dozens of engineers that is essentially helping with broader strategic direction, oftentimes would parachute themselves into areas that require specific attention, and then we'll kind of move on to the next thing. But otherwise, engineers don't work as closely with PMs. I will say that the autonomy model oftentimes, in my opinion, is also motivated by tech firms essentially trying to cut costs and trying to think about how AI will shape the organization in the future, and maybe front loading how that setup should be organized. Um, but I'm not sure if there's, at least in my opinion, enough evidence on the ground to show that this is indeed like an effective model. One last thing that I will say here, when we say 1 to 100 engineers, it doesn't mean that every engineer has a PM staff to them. It could be just that many engineers just don't necessarily work with a PM. Anecdotal data points that we have from the AI labs, for example, is that they do have thousands and thousands of engineers with just a handful of dozens of PMs. So it sort of like checks out if we look at the kind of industry data. The next slide, um, yeah, I think so. Regardless of which direction we're going, whether it's 2 to 1 or 100 to 1, overall the role of the PM is evolving somewhat in a similar direction, which is much more focused, as Rachel mentioned earlier, on product judgment, business sense, product sense, and truly understanding what are the critical business user pain points, and the right strategy to execute against those. Um, and if I had to summarize the main takeaway from how all of those organizational entities are shaping up, the main takeaway for you and for us as PMs is really to keep honing in on those really critical skills that, at least in the foreseeable future, I don't think we can really delegate to AI, which is all those decisions that require understanding of the business, having sound product and design sense, and truly understanding the ecosystem like end to end. Here, um, here we're seeing how the composition of the team, sort of like the atomic product team, is changing. On the left side, this is again traditional team structure. You have several engineers and then multiple cross-functional partners working on design, data science, to work to essentially develop and launch a feature. With AI, the boundaries between all those roles are blurring, and many of those roles are collapsing onto each other. For example, we already know that PMs are expected to create prototypes and even run experiments in production, to do lightweight analysis. We know that UXR sometimes would also create prototypes and code sometimes, and ship new features to production. So those boundaries are again blurring, and we're seeing an evolution towards a model that is often referred to as AI pods, where there's a small number of engineers with a super IC that is essentially performing all of those cross-functional roles, and enabling the overall pod to execute against a single business goal. That super IC doesn't necessarily need to be a PM by origin. It can be a data scientist or product designer or any of the cross-functional members that transitioned into that role. And it also depends on where that pod is in terms of evolution of the product, whether it's like 0 to 1 or a more mature product. And I think that sort of dictates, and the conclusion here is that the career progression for PMs is no longer necessarily measured by the size of my team, but really about how big of a problems how big of a problem am I solving, and how much complexity am I helping the organization to navigate. I would just mention one last thing, that on top of that, there's also pretty prevalent organizational flattening happening across big techs. So many of those pods end up just being completely flat, with many management hierarchies essentially disappearing. And the way for a PM in that environment, the way for them to grow is to focus on bigger problems, harder problems, and more impact for the organization as a whole.
And
Back to you, Rachel.
yeah, and what I'll say in that context is, as you're thinking about your promotion, the traditional thought that you're going to be promoted into a manager, I mean, we've seen that for a while, that that's not the case, but here it's more about being able to solve more ambiguous problems. It's more about being able to influence, but management as your way of growing and getting promoted is not necessarily the way it's going to continue. And we've already seen this in the past few years. So when I'm thinking about these different roles, I like to think about them in terms of the different questions that that each role answers, right? And so instead of thinking about who owns what, I prefer thinking about who is responsible for what questions usually. And those are collapsing to Itai's point to a single IC function. So PM usually says, why are we building this and what should it be? User research is looking for what are users experiencing and what is their emotional journey. Data science thinks about, is the bet worth making and did we actually move the needle after the fact? This is going to be very critical, especially when development cycles are quicker and quicker. Being able to understand if your hypothesis is confirmed or not is going to be key to um, being successful in terms of your feature development and launches. Design, can the user complete the job they hired the product for, and can they do that efficiently? Engineering is how do we build this and what are the real constraints? And in a world where you're having so many engineers operating independently, there's also the question that they get more autonomy and what should it be? And this has been the case in engineering driven companies like Meta, like Google, in many cases, engineers are full partners in deciding what to build, not just how. And that is very important when you're going into companies that are very engineering driven to understand that. And then obviously the cross-org alignment is making sure that everybody has the same understanding of what we're building, but also what success looks like, which is really important as to the why behind of it. And so you want to make sure that you can define the problem that is worth solving and making a decision of what not to build. If you can build things much, much quicker, you can make a very confusing product for your users. And that's what we talk about judgment. The fact that you can build something doesn't mean that you should build it. When you're thinking about user research, you want to think about how do you ask questions that give you insights for what the users are actually looking for? And how do you also um, observe them while they're using it to identify different gaps? Data science helps you figure out your North Star metrics and your supporting metrics and the opportunity sizing of the different bets that you're looking to make. Design can help you figure out the efficiency of the job to be done. Um, and you want to make sure that you understand your scalability from the engineering point of view. And then for the cross-org alignment, you want to hold the full picture across all of these 5 roles, right? When you're thinking about how AI accelerates it, right? AI can help you with compounding, with getting your competitive synthesis. It can help you draft your PRD. Anybody who thinks that the job of a product manager is to write PRDs, I would suggest think again because that is a bare minimum, but that's not a good description of the role of a product manager, especially as we're moving more towards judgment. And really think about the pattern recognition, right? In user research, you have AI acceleration by creating synthetic workflows, for example, by users that simulate user behavior so you can identify where users might get stuck and surface bottlenecks. On data science, you can think about hypothesis generation, anomaly detection, different signals that you can mix in order to validate success or opportunity sizing. Obviously, prototyping is a big one, and I hope every one of you has had a chance to try and prototype something. And if not, take a look at the email I sent you before. There's a little prompting for prototyping there that you can try to use to get that monkey off your shoulder. Engineering, this is insane. Like agentic coding, building an agent, a team of agents to complete your coding tasks for you. And then it's really about evaluating the quality of the code, the efficiency of it, understanding system design. System design is making a pretty big comeback for product managers. And then the cross org alignment, it's your shared reality. It's making sure that you have a joint reality across the entire teams. And so AI fluency is your table stakes, but you really want to think about how do you use it to compound not just your productivity, but also your the product impact that you're driving. Which brings us into Itai, talk to us a bit about productivity versus product impact, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. That's definitely a great segue to this topic, which before just getting into the meat of it, I do want to clarify an area that sometimes confuses people. When we usually talk about AI in the context of product management, we think about productivity, about using cloud code and building AI agents to make our life easier and automate some processes. But at this point, that was kind of new and novel, like a couple of months ago. At this point, it's sort of like table stakes and expected from everyone to just be really fluent with all of those tools. What's really goes above and beyond at the moment is truly understanding the AI technology and how do LLMs model work, how like what are the different machine learning techniques, and it manifests itself in performance in the workplace as well as interviews. So for if we talk about performance, for example, again using AI agents to streamline workflows, that's sort of like table stakes. The real question is, were you able to identify an opportunity to leverage AI to truly bend the curve on business impact for your organization? So that's one question that we ask ourselves on the performance side. And on the interview side, again, every candidate is expected to be fluent in all of those tools. But what we're seeing now is increasingly more companies and interview types also ask about want to assess understanding of machine learning techniques, LLM concept, making sure that you understand trade-offs between compute, number of parameters, context window, things like that, because those are truly critical to be able to build to make the right trade-offs between user experience and technical complexity. Um, the next slide, yeah, thanks. The the idea here is that the sort of like what we know about the loop of essentially the PM interview process has changed a lot. So companies have been sort of sticking to the same interview standards for like many years, and it's pretty striking to see how just over a course of a few months, overnight, pretty much many of them just introduce AI in many areas to make sure that they can candidates that they're eventually extending offers to are also fluent and meet those different new criteria. So we see it across product sense where AI is being introduced. Analytical thinking is being expanded to include also technical fluency, and we see some companies that are introducing system design style of interviews. And then, as Rachel mentioned earlier, beyond AI literacy and fluency, also demonstrating judgment while working with AI. My hot take on this trend is that it might be a little bit premature. I think the jury is still out, but it might be a little bit premature because I do think it's taking away opportunity from employers to truly assess the what's most important for PMs, which is as discussed, as mentioned multiple times, judgment, critical thinking, product sense, and design sense. Um, if we spend too much time doing those interviews, prompting and seeing how you interact with AI, that leaves less time to truly get us understand like how you think independently. But again, too early to tell. Um,
Uh, yeah, go for it.
no, go ahead, Rachel.
So AI Product Sense, as Itai mentioned, is now a dedicated interview round. You see this at Meta, at Google, OpenAI. You are given a prompt and you're expected to come up with a actual prototype that works and use AI tools live. And to Itai's point, what you're thinking about is what are the questions that you're going to ask in your research phase of what you're going to build? How do you also question the outputs that the LLM gives you when you're running your analysis, right? if you're trying to identify segments of users and their problems, how do you question the output that the AI brings you? How do you choose your data sources? In some cases, it might be appropriate to look at what people on Reddit are saying, right? But in many cases, you really don't want that to be your data source. And let's not forget, LLMs are trained on the wisdom of the mass, not just on the best case scenario. So also, if you're thinking about it in the B2B context, for example, maybe you want to use RAG or limit the context of the insights you're generating to your own customer interviews and insights. So you want to make sure that you're thinking not just about the questions that you're asking, but double checking the responses that you're getting. Do you know when the output is wrong is really, really important. It's really easy to just ask AI something, but you want to make sure, wait, does this make sense? And then in the middle of in the case, when you're getting challenged on your assumptions and on your hypothesis, how do you respond to that, right? How do you respond to new information that you might get? This is really important and really pivotal in order to demonstrate judgment. Analytical thinking, there might be some AI and machine learning, to Itai's point, and technical fluency. And we're talking about this in system design, right? If you used to be asking about, a metric drop, but now how are you thinking about problems that might come up? For example, for new users, how do you think about evaluating new content or about solving the cold start problem as it's being called, right? Or how do you make trade-offs between your context window, your compute, and your impact on UX? In that context, how do you think about how many tokens you're eating if you're bringing, if you're using agentic AI, right? Your costs can really explode, and the value that you're driving to users might not be that high. How are you thinking about hallucinations and model evaluations? These are things to consider. Um, what is the cold start problem with AI? That's a great question that somebody just asked. So imagine that you have a new piece of content or a new user who just joined the system. How do you evaluate a new piece of content? How many people should have eyeballs on it, and who should be evaluating that content? How do you know if that piece of content is good or if it's not good? For a new user, you want to show them when you're thinking about a new user and the cold start problem for a new user, you want to be able to show them value really, really quickly. But let's say you know nothing about that new user. What is the best guess that you're using? There are a lot of systems like reinforcement learning and multi-arm bandits that use active learning in real time in order to define the answers to these problems, right? And so the ideal candidate can say what breaks and what are the trade-offs and why these trade-offs are important for the user and the business context. And then we mentioned AI literacy as being table stakes and judgment being the differentiator. We want to think about your deployment realities, your failure modes, your technology evaluation, and your model evaluation. These are the key things you want to think about. What is your latency, your scalability? Failure modes, you want to think a bit about what does it mean to run an agent on your user data? How do you think about trust? How do you think about safety? These are really important things. And technology evaluation. Should you be building using this model? What happens if a model falls back to a different model, right? What happens when Claude decides that they're not giving you access to Fable 5 because they think that you're trying to do something that is unsafe and then either fall you back in a different model or give you different responses, right? How does your product handle that? When you're thinking about networking in this context, so I'm switching gears from interviews to networking, which is really important, especially in today's world where you're seeing a lot of the judgment being evaluated and a lot of the questions that recruiters are looking to answer is who do you know and how do we know that you are a high quality candidate when the market is flooding? So networking is really, really important. And how do you use your network strategically is important. When you're thinking about your networking and you're thinking about your new opportunities, you want to be able to answer three questions that are not going to change. Why you, why the opportunity, and why together it's magic. And you need to put it in a compelling case. You need to be able to understand the problems, the context, and communicate that clearly across your introductions, across your network. Any conversation is an interview, essentially. And Itai, let's close this together and tie this all up with a bow.
Yeah, so if a junior PM had great AI tools, what could they not do that you currently do? Um, I think there's definitely a lot that AI is bringing to the table, and the dynamics are changing every day. The the takeaway I think from this talk is that um, with AI shouldn't replace your judgment, shouldn't replace your business sense and product sense, should augment what you're trying to do. Like you should think about AI not as a system that you delegate your cognition to, but rather like a thought partner that you can use to um, drive even more value than what you can do just on your own. So think about it in the context of whatever the context you're on. Think about it almost like a cross-functional partner that is sitting with you and thinking with you about the problem.
And I found this quote by Satya Nadella from a few days ago. He's talking about what AI adoption means for Microsoft. He wrote a really good article about this on X just literally 3 days ago. And this really caught my attention. This means that the real opportunity is not in picking the best model, but instead in building a learning loop on top of models where human capital and token capital compound. You can offload a task or even a job, but you can never offload your learning. And so this means to me is that your judgment, your learning, your experience, what got you to where you are today is really your superpower that you need to hold on to, as well as continuously learn, iterate, and find your niche and your opportunities well. So, in summary, what we covered today, we spoke a bit about how the world changed and what it means. Building is cheap, judgment is scarce, and essentially, you're now having the rise of the super IC who can really be anyone. And so titles matter less. Getting promoted, you want to make sure that your judgment is visible in rooms that you're not in. It's the real question you want to be able to answer is what did you do last month that AI couldn't have reproduced? Getting hired, interview looks for judgment, AI product sense, technology trade-offs, knowing when the model is wrong are really important in terms of being able to demonstrate that you're a good candidate. And then your networking, you want to make sure that you are talking about in their language, helping your recruiters, hiring managers, and your network understand why the opportunity, why together it's magic. It's not a pitch. It's really being very specific in your research and in your value proposition. And just thinking about a few things you can do from now to as before you run on your way or before we move to Q&A, I want you to think about for those looking to get promoted, as I mentioned earlier, write down 3 things that you've done last month that only you could have done. Some things that a junior PM with great AI tools couldn't replicate. This should be yours, something that helps you identify your confidence and your superpowers. If you can't get to 3, that's your opportunity to know what to work on. And bring that list to your next skip manager conversation, to your next career conversation with your manager. For people looking for their next role, really start with your value proposition for any role that you are applying for or evaluating. Why me? Why the opportunity? Why together it's magic? And if it could apply to any company, you need to start over. And then that specificity essentially opens the door for the interview. And then for the interview, you want to think about all the other skills that we spoke about.